Marie Curie, the radium woman. We're in 1867, the year the United States bought Alaska from a Russian czar for the very respectable price of $7 million. In Egypt, a colossal undertaking that will drastically change maritime trade routes and balance of power in the Middle East is inaugurated. It is the Suez Canal. And a guy named Alfred Nobel patents something called dynamite, making him immensely rich. But his guilty conscience, when he sees the wonderfully sophisticated use humanity gives his invention, leads him to create a famous yearly prize dedicated to those who do most good in the world. Coincidentally, on the 7th of November of that very same year in Warsaw, Poland, a country under Russian rule at the time, Marie Sklodowska was born. She would be the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the matriarch of a family destined to be an integral part of that exclusive club. Marie was a brilliant student, but in Russia, women weren't allowed to receive a university education, so she had to get a degree from a clandestine school known as the Warsaw Floating University. In 1891, with barely any money left to pay for food or housing, she emigrated to Paris to continue studying physics, math, and chemistry at the prestigious Sorbonne University. 3 years later, the professor of physics and chemistry, Pierre Curie, must have seen a great potential in his young and brilliant student, and he offered her a job and a stipend in his small lab. Outside the lab, the chemistry led to an unstoppable and flourishing chain reaction, whose components and molecular structures would provide the backbone for a lovely marriage. At that time, the world's attention was focused on the scientific discoveries of a Frenchman named Henri Becquerel, who discovered that some minerals like uranium emitted spontaneous radiation. The young Marie wanted to understand the mysteries of this phenomena, which she baptized as radioactivity, and so she experimented with a more radioactive element than uranium itself. It was a mineral called pitchblende. After years of experimenting with radioactivity and purifying tons and tons of the pitchblende material, the Curies discovered a new element, hugely radioactive, which they called polonium in honor of Marie's home country. But her intuition pushes her further, and she asks for 2,000 pounds of pitchblende to try to find another radioactive substance within the mineral. 5 months later, she had isolated 1/10 of a gram of a new super radioactive substance. They christened it radium. In December of 1903, Marie Curie, Pierre Curie, and Henri Becquerel won the Nobel Prize in Physics for their research in radioactivity. 3 years later, Pierre would die as a result of being run over by a horse-drawn carriage. Marie would never fully recover from the loss of her husband. In 1911, she had a brief but intense relationship with a married physicist named Paul Langevin. He had been a disciple of Pierre's. But when the scorned and furious wife of Langevin uncovers their affair, public opinion and the tabloid press go to town on Marie, and she suffers a moral and social lynching. Determined to defend Marie's honor, Paul Langevin challenged the editor of one of the tabloids to a duel. But the gossip and rumors would only be washed away after Marie won a second Nobel Prize later that same year. This one was in chemistry, for the discovery of polonium and radium. Even though keeping it for herself would have made her immensely rich, Marie, in a noble gesture, donated the process of radioactive isolation for radium to science.
Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less.
Atomic research cost Marie her life. She died of cancer in 1934 after a life dedicated to the study of radioactivity. She was 66. For a good part of the 20th century, people thought radioactivity was a miracle product and was commercialized as such. From children's toys to toothpaste, from soap to glow-in-the-dark condoms, even beauty products sold by frauds claiming to be related to the Curie family. Marie and Pierre Curie have 2 craters on the dark side of the moon named after them. Marie and Pierre had two daughters, Irene and Eve. Irene received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1935 along with her husband, Frédéric Joliot, for their work on artificial radioactivity. Eve became a renowned human rights activist, and in order to keep up with family tradition, her husband, Henry Richardson, accepted a Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of UNICEF in 1965. Irene's daughter, Helen, became a nuclear physicist like her mother and her grandmother before her. She married the grandson of Paul Langevin, that physicist who was willing to fight a duel to honor Marie Curie 40 years earlier.